I'm in my writing cottage. I'm very fortunate to have a wonderful old antebellum plantation home in Capps, Florida, which has a population of 1. You are actually interviewing the mayor of Capps, Florida. The big house is off that way. I have about a 900 square foot cottage out behind the house where I write. So this is the cottage.
Having read
From Where You Dream, yes.
From Where You Dream, I know that process and not only being in the same place, but really having the same kind of props and that sort of thing is important to you. So just talk to me a little bit about, since this is where you write, how you get in that zone.
First of all, I come out fairly early, oftentimes before dawn. And the first thing I do is to go grind some coffee beans and make my morning coffee. And then I get to work. And it is a daily process. I'm an absolute believer in the necessity of writing every day. Once you begin the work of literary fiction, you really have to go there every day into that unconscious space, the dream space, as I call it in that book. And so it's pretty much as simple as that.
Bob, I want to change locations now and talk a little bit about your time in Vietnam. How did your experience there impact you as a writer?
Before I went to Vietnam, I was still considering myself a playwright. I got a master's degree in playwriting from the University of Iowa. And I was really a terrible playwright. I mean, most of my, all of my impassioned writing was going into the stage directions, and that's a bad sign for a playwright. But I was writing plays. I went to Vietnam, and when I went there, the U.S. Army had sent me to language school before I went over for a year and taught me Vietnamese. And so my experience in Vietnam was drastically shaped by that language ability. And if you learn a foreign language properly, you don't just learn the equivalencies of words and do a kind of rapid translation in your mind. In fact, what you do is rename the world. Every physical object, every sense impression, everything has a new name. And if you have learned that language properly and have assimilated that new name, and you look at the thing in its ba instead of cypress when you're there, your sense of the tree is shaped and reshaped. And moving from one language to the other, especially in a wonderful culture that I was able to immerse myself in, and especially with the extra heightened moment-to-moment sensibility of being in danger at all times, heightened my moment-to-moment sensual awareness such that I recognized eventually what art form was natural to me, and that art form was fiction. So Vietnam had a profound effect on me in that way, not to mention the remarkable Vietnamese people and my access to them, which I had in quite wonderful ways, and my immersion in their culture and their openness and warmth toward me. All of that taught me about them and about their culture and about their lives, but then taught me about the shared humanity that we had. And the Vietnamese, what I learned in Vietnam, has been part of every book I've written in that sense, even if the characters and the situation have nothing to do with Vietnam whatsoever.
Now, a lot of your stories and your characters have had a great deal to do with Vietnam. I'm thinking of your stories that take place in Louisiana of Vietnamese immigrants who come to this country. And I'm just curious, given what you were just telling me about the language and your sense of the world being so different between English and Vietnamese, those stories in particular, like the stories in A Good Scent from a Strange Mountain, in a way, was it difficult for you to take on the personas and write the stories of these Vietnamese immigrants writing in English? Would it have been different if you were able to write the stories in Vietnamese?
No, because in fact, when I write a first-person story, the voice that you hear in my first-person stories, and honestly, virtually all first-person literary fiction, the voice you're seeing on the page and hearing in your head when you read it properly and slowly, it's not usually the voice that you would hear if you were sitting across a dinner table from that character and hearing them speak to you in a kind of overt way. Neither is it the sort of surface blah blah voice that we all have going, where we're sort of thinking about things in summary or analytical terms. That moment-to-moment, sensual, ongoing, intense flow of voice, it's really the voice of the sensibility, of the inner self. And so the challenge then, of course, was to authentically inhabit the sensibility and soul of characters quite different from myself. On the surface, Vietnamese, a different race, a different culture, often a different gender. And that's difficult, of course. But for the artist who goes not to ideas and not to thoughts and not to analysis, but to the dream space, the book I was talking about, art does not come from ideas. Art does not come from the analytical mind. Art comes from the place where you dream, from your unconscious, from your white-hot center. You start off by writing your first literary works. You need to write very close to your own very personal white-hot center, close to your, I'll use the ugly word, demographic. But the thing about the artistic unconscious is, if you go there day after day, every day, as I was mentioning, if you go there story after story, book after book, eventually the artist can break through to a place in her own unconscious where she is neither male nor female. She's neither white, black, yellow, red, or brown. She's neither Vietnamese or American or Albanian or Serbian. She's neither Catholic, Muslim, Hindu, or Jew. She's human. She taps into, you can tap into as an artist, into the collective unconscious, into that universal shared humanity. And so you also then need surface experience to create characters quite different from yourself. But I did that in the back alleys of Saigon, where every night when I was in Saigon, for 7 months, every night I would wander alone into the steamy back alleys of Saigon, where nobody ever seemed to sleep, and crouch in the doorways with these people. And they were lovely, and they invited me into their homes and into their culture and into their lives. And women have always said that I write women's voices directly, quite authentically. Well, I've been married 4 times, and I've known a lot of other women, and I've always listened very carefully. And obviously, I didn't say the right things, but I listened carefully, and so I did know a wide range of characters as well, in that more objective way. But ultimately, what makes them real is that I broke through to, in my own personal unconscious, into that collective unconscious, and then I could bring what I knew about the human condition up through the vessels of characters who might be quite different from me.
Can you talk to me at all about your current project or projects that you're working on?
Well, I wrote a book 7 years ago called Had a Good Time. And it was a book of short stories based on my old picture postcard collection.
Uh-huh.
I'd collected them not so much for the images on the front, but for the messages written on the back.
These are the same postcards that you wrote the story on the FSU website, correct?
Exactly. Okay. And by the way, that project, there's 17 2-hour sessions where I write a story from scratch. Those are now available, all 17 sessions are now available for free for download at iTunes. Well, one of those stories was called The One in White. It was set in 1914. All these stories are set between 1906 and 1917. This one was set in 1914 and had to do with Woodrow Wilson invading Veracruz, Mexico for 7 months, which he did. The voice of them in that story was in the voice of a newspaper reporter, a war correspondent. And war correspondents at the beginning of the 20th century were real rock stars. They were important. This war correspondent, his voice always intrigued me. I loved him. And that story, by the way, was published in the Atlantic Monthly and won a National Magazine Award. I loved that voice so much that I have now taken up with a wonderful editor named Otto Penzler, who came over to my publisher, Grove Press. He read the story and loved it. I've signed a 2-book contract with him, going back to this guy's voice, which I love. And I'm going to follow him in through the Mexican Revolution and into World War I in over a couple of books, and perhaps even beyond that, as an investigative reporter, war correspondent, and there will be the elements of naturally, organically, and in literary terms, but the elements of espionage and international thriller. If I might also say, Max, though, that's what I'm working on now. I took you literally, but this coming August, very important. I have a new novel coming out. It's already done. I'm not working on it. It is in the can, in process. Already have galleys for it. It's called A Small Hotel, and it's set in New Orleans. It's a contemporary novel set in New Orleans about a marriage falling apart. So it's that's the book that's coming out next in August of 2011. And it's called A Small Hotel, coming from Grove Press.
Is there anything else that you want to add? I know you have to get back to your dogs. I don't want to keep you, but anything else that you want to add that you think is important for folks out there to know about place in literature or yourself?
Well, one thing I'd like to leave everyone with is it's interesting. A lot of very sincere people come to me when I appear in public, and they are impassioned about literature. They love reading, and God knows that we need to continue to read books and as a culture and produce them. But one odd thing is they frequently will tell me how much they love literature and reading books by citing the fact that they say, oh, I love books so much I read 3 books a week. And my reaction is, oh no, slow the hell down. The thing I would leave your viewers with is slow down when you read, especially when you read literary fiction. And I know a lot of professional people read professionally, and people read nonfiction in certain ways, and even people read commercial fiction in certain fast ways. But if you read literary fiction, you must understand that the literary object exists in the total organic effect of every tiny decision, every tiny detail, every comma stroke is organically resonating into everything else. And so if you read literary fiction faster than would allow you to hear the narrative voice in your head, you are not reading at all. You're going too fast. Slow way down. Read every word. Hear the voice of the narrator in your head. And that's the way to read literary fiction, in the only way. So that would be a last word I'd like to leave with you.
All right. Bob, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
My pleasure, Max. Thanks for having me talk to you.